Okay.
Adaptation? No. All right. Cool. All right, just opening the stream. Sweet. Okay, got that up. So I've finished off the grammar exercises. I haven't read part 5 yet, and then I had a problem with Kindle on my computer, didn't want to start, which I've sort of got a workaround for now, but I haven't done any more on the chapter stuff because of that, besides taking notes and things. But I feel like that's probably not as much of a blocker as the grammar stuff was.
Okay. So I've been working on yes/no philosophy stuff a bunch, and so I wanted to offer, if you want, I can teach you about that stuff while it's loaded in my mind, or we can just do the regular stuff. That's fine too.
Yeah, no, yes, no stuff sounds good. I'm happy to do some of that.
Okay, we can try it and maybe switch over later anyways.
Cool.
Okay, yes or no. Okay, so you have the course thing, right?
Yeah, I bought it for like a colleague of mine. So I haven't actually gone through it very much. I feel like I have a like a I guess a very passing sort of overview of the idea. Um, I think I
Okay.
read. I'm not sure if you had a post about either like Boolean epistemology or binary epistemology or something early on that I might have read about it. Um,
Probably.
I'm not sure where I picked up the term, but yeah.
Okay. So idea number one is everyone, absolutely every school of philosophy or epistemology or whatever, has a certain idea that I think is wrong, which I call amounts of goodness.
Yep.
Uh, I have to make up names for things because they're so common and standard that they don't even have names. Like, no one ever debated them, so they never had a name where they're like, I'm this school of thought, because it's so taken for granted. So the
Yep.
basic idea of amounts of goodness is that you have strong arguments, strong evidence, weak arguments, weak evidence. So there's degrees. There are degree arguments. Um, so you're probably familiar with this in the very common form today of probability of ideas, plausibility of ideas, weight of the argument. People put numbers on it, so can use numbers, but you can also do it with no numbers.
You
Getting
mean
rid of
you can?
getting rid of numbers doesn't make any fundamental difference. Go ahead.
Oh, I see what you mean. As in, it's not that you can just like not that taking the numbers away fundamentally changes anything. People talk about it in other terms, like yeah, like strong and weak arguments is sort of the way of doing degree
Right.
without numbers.
Right. So some people will never put numbers on it. They don't want to give it a number from 0 to 100. Um, like there's different schools of thought. Some people are like, yeah, we should definitely just assign a number that says our confidence, and I'll say 80. And other people are like, I'm pretty confident, but I'm not going to put a number on it. So
Yep.
there's a major difference between those schools of thought, like whether they like numbers or dislike numbers. Um, whether See, the one school is sort of like it's hard to quantify, so let's not put made up numbers on it. And the other school is like, well, numbers are going to make it more precise than not using numbers. Like even if it's hard, it's better to have numbers than just nothing. Like avoiding the numbers isn't going to help with precision. So there's those two schools of thought, but from my perspective, they're basically the same thing.
Mhm.
Because they both have weights and scores. Like even if you don't use numbers, it's essentially equivalent to scoring the argument.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, and then they have positive and negative argument.
I
So
guess as well, it's the same fundamental problem, whether they assign numbers or not. The error is the same.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't change like my arguments and my way of dealing with it. It's not like a relevant factor. Like my criticisms are not based on their specific use of numbers or some detail like that. Okay,
Yep.
so they have positive and negative arguments, and Appearians have made a big deal out of this and said negative arguments are way better, which is partially true, but I think it's overrated and not as big of a deal as people say.
Negative as in criticisms?
Yes, so a positive argument adds to the score, it helps an idea, and a negative argument subtracts from the score, it makes the idea worse. You're arguing against something instead of for something, for or against, like pro or con, right? Very common distinction.
Yep.
Okay, so the one of the key ideas here is degrees equal, or yeah, degrees equals amount, same thing, equals continuum, equal maps to real numbers. Does that make sense? You're probably
Yep.
familiar with continuums and real numbers.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. So briefly, one of the connections, which I won't go into much right now, is this is in BOI, but it's not original to BOI. Do you remember this at
Yep.
all from BOI?
Yeah. So particularly, it reminds me of. I was going to ask actually, but the idea of like conjectures and refutations, and having a refutation or a criticism, if it's unanswered, is a reason not to believe it true. And because of ideas like consistency and objective reality, it means that if we have a reason not to believe something true, it cannot be true.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, so there's this very fundamental problem in terms of error correction and analog systems, uh, which is basically that you can't get the noise out of the system because you can't round to the closest thing that's like a valid value. Because all values are valid, you can't round to closest to remove small errors, so errors accumulate. So you can think of this like at a low level in terms of electric signals in a computer. There's some variance in the signals when you're sending signals between different like transistors or parts or gates or whatever. And this variance doesn't ruin computation because basically every time we get to a gate, we normalize the signal. If we're sending a 1 out of that gate, we just send the right amount for a 1 instead of passing along the varied thing that's at like 0.99.
Yep. Yep. So
Um,
yeah, an example difference would be, so something like a neural net doesn't work like that, where the intensity of the signal matters for the computation, but in digital circuitry, we always, pull it back to high or low or whatever it is at the time, and we don't worry about,
yeah,
those small errors aren't significant to the, or they're
right.
particularly only errors if they're not exactly the right voltage.
Yeah, so we have small errors, but we constantly correct them. And they're easy to correct in the system, and they don't build up to the point of being like a half a voltage error, at which point you wouldn't know if it's which way the error is, what it's from.
Yep.
So as long as we don't get extraordinarily unlucky with like a voltage surge, like a very large amount of variance, we're going to be okay. We have a great deal of robustness. So pretty analogously, degree arguments have the same problem, where you can add up all these things with like errors in them, and the errors can accumulate.
Yep.
That's one of the things that's wrong with them. Um, okay, so what is my view? My view is that the main problem is that people are vague. So people are vague. We need clear goals, purposes, problems for ideas. So vagueness is a very well-known problem. People know about it. They try to deal with it. They can recognize lots of things are vague already. So complaining about vagueness doesn't add anything in general, but there's a specific type of vagueness that I think is really important and under-noticed. So the specific type is when the problem is too vague. So people have a problem like, I want a pet. Vague problem. And then people will try to come up with ideas about which pet they should get. And they'll say, well, I should get the dog, no, the cat, or the other cat. And then it's very hard to sort that out in a decisive way. Like, how are you going to make decisive arguments about which pet you should get when the problem is stated as, I want a pet? You could say, well, this one's a pet and that's one's a pet. They're both solutions. But if you're actually more picky than I want any pet at all, then your pickiness is not represented in the problem. So So, okay, another thing is decisive argument. So as opposed to degree arguments, there are decisive arguments. These are things that say, this is wrong, or, and they're only negative. So degree arguments were positive and negative, but decisive arguments are only negative because you can never prove this is right. People have tried that. So there are attempts at positive arguments, positive decisive arguments, like a proof that God exists. Like, we finally and decisively established God definitely exists. Here's the proof. We're done. Right? People try to do that, but you can always say, maybe we could figure something out later. We do have mathematical proofs that are like pretty good positive arguments. Like, but you can, anyways. But basically, decisive arguments are only negative because we're fallible. We can't be like done and know this is true. That's kind of an approximation. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So decisive arguments. Okay, so a lot of people who believe in degree arguments also believe in decisive arguments. It's very common that they have both. Some people don't because they say that decisive arguments violate fallibility. So those are the two main schools of thought. So one and then two. Two is decisive arguments don't exist because fallibility, but they're just really strong arguments. So as an approximation, they're okay. So no one really rejects them, because the people who say that there are no decisive arguments, they're going to look at a decisive argument and they're going to say that's actually a really strong argument, but it's fallible. So it's
they'll just call it 99%.
Okay, so it's not going to make like a large difference in a practical way usually. So in either case, they accept that the decisive arguments are very important, high priority arguments. Right? So example of a decisive argument is that contradicts the evidence, or that contradicts itself, or like that contradicts basic arithmetic. These are examples of decisive arguments. These are the kind of things that people are like, that's a knockdown argument. It's just wrong. Or, and you have to take into account fallibility in like some sense, but as far as we know, like we can reach a conclusion and be satisfied. And the thing about these arguments is that if you have an argument like this, degree arguments don't matter anymore. You're not going to say like, here's 5 reasons that it's pretty nice. Like, here's 5 good points and 5 pros for that. And the other guy's like, right, but it violates arithmetic. So it doesn't matter how many good things there are about it. Like, your nice points, your degree arguments just don't matter when it violates arithmetic or
Yep.
contradicts the evidence or whatever. So these things have priority. Priority. Right? Okay. So why do they want degree arguments at all? What is the purpose of them when decisive arguments have priority anyways?
So I have a few ideas in answer to that question. Um,
Yep.
One of them is because we want positive arguments, or there's an intuition towards wanting them, and if we can't do them with decisive arguments, we need some way to have them. Um, Another one is that it is like helpful for evading things, like it's helpful to evade truths we don't want to acknowledge, um, about ourselves, about the world, etc. Um, it lets us, try and make some determination if we don't have any decisive arguments. So maybe just someone hasn't thought of a decisive argument. Um, so we have these other ideas. Um, I mean, uh, I'm trying to think of like people when they do specific things. So like when people argue that we're living in a simulation, sort of thing. Like, what are they using the degree arguments for? Because that's ultimately like it only comes down to degree argument. They'll make a thing about like, you know, probability says that we must be in a thing, in a simulation. Uh, yeah, those are my three ideas, I think.
Okay, yeah. The third one is my main point. Um, Although instead of saying no, I'd say like when you run out of. So
Yeah.
people use degree arguments when they run out of decisive arguments. So they might have had like 7 decisive arguments already, and they ruled out like 500 ideas. But they have more than one idea left, and they've run out of decisive arguments. So
Yep.
when there is more than one idea left after using all your decisive arguments. Okay, so that's what degree arguments are basically for, is this backup. And the standard belief is you need that backup frequently. It comes up a lot. It's very common that we can't figure things out decisively. Decisive arguments are a very limited category. So when people like make big mistakes, then we can use decisive arguments on them. But when like smart people are working on hard problems and coming up with reasonable ideas, then we mostly can't use decisive arguments. That's what like everyone thinks. Make sense?
Yeah, that last part. When people are so sorry, can you say the second part of that again?
Yeah, so if you have like smart people working on complicated problems and coming up with reasonable ideas, then you're usually not going to be able to blow them out of the water with decisive arguments. You're going to have to say there's shades of gray here, there's judgment calls, here are some pros and cons and degree arguments.
So, I mean, physics comes to mind for a lot of these, or talking about this a lot. So something like this might be like, we don't have a good explanation for dark matter, so and there's like 5 proposals, and people
Yeah,
like degree arguments because it's like this is feels better or is more compatible or whatever else they want to put there.
yeah. And physics is it's known for actually having experiments that get some things refuted. There are other fields that are not like the hard sciences. So they're more favorable to degree arguments when they're not dealing with actual science experiments that measure things in a clear way. Like sociology and psychology and history are a lot worse with this stuff
Hmm.
because they're further away from math and from measurement, which are some of the most common sources of decisive arguments.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so my theory is that we can come up with more decisive arguments than people think. In fact, we can come up with enough decisive arguments for any issue, any time, and we don't have to run out of them.
Okay. Yep. It feels like so one of the things that occurred to me, similarity with the choice, was the idea of, or not similarity, but relatedness, um, the idea of conflicts and contradictions, and sort of looking at them to zoom in on the problem. In the same way that you might, if you have two competing physics theories, then you don't look at what they agree on, you look at what they disagree on, and you structure an experiment only in that area to see if you end up with a result that's compatible with one, or maybe compatible with neither. Um, in which case, in the latter case, we'd know that both would be wrong, and in the former case, we'd know that the one that didn't agree was wrong.
Yes, that is a very important technique. It helps a lot looking for how can we differentiate these ideas? How can we come up with some way of judging or looking at it where at least one of them will be wrong or fail or whatever, rather than sometimes when people are making positive arguments, they say, my theory is great because X, and X also is true of their rival theory. So that's pretty silly.
Yep, it doesn't help us in determining um, which one's actually incorrect. If well, I sort of it's hard to talk about a bit because um, like the idea of everything is a misconception. I'm even struggling to express it in that everything is a misconception to some degree was what intuitively wanted to say. But uh,
Well, I
yeah,
think that's
it's
okay. You don't have to avoid degrees in all of life. Like, continuums still exist and have their role. They're just wrong for arguments and for certain specific things.
okay. Are we? Is it? So one thing that I have sort of not that I've done much with yes no, but that I've definitely struggled with thinking about it was or is the idea of like Newton's theory of gravity is like more correct than like the orbits of the planets being circles with epicycles or things like that. Um, and it's sort of
Yeah,
like, we know that Newton's theory of gravity isn't true, but it's like a closer approximation to reality, I guess, or it's a more elegant approximation, or it's sort of in that it feels like there's still an element of like more trueness, but that's not really the right word. It's less incompatible with reality, fewer errors.
yeah.
Um,
Yes. So, a good way to think about this is that one idea solves more problems than the other one, or
yeah, okay.
solves problems that we care more about. So you can look at a list of problems and you can take multiple theories and say which problems does it solve and which does it fail to solve. And you can go through the list and you can find one is solving way more of them or way more important ones, or especially if one is a superset of the other, then you have a
Mhm.
very clear comparison.
Yep. So it's not wrong to compare, or it's not incorrect to compare theories like that, but it is
Right.
when we're trying to determine things that we don't know whether they're true or not. When we know that both are false, we can sort of make more of a determination about that because
Yeah.
we understand the limits of the explanation better.
Yeah, so it all depends on what your goal is. There's goals where saying this one is more useful than that one would be reasonable. But if you're trying to decide which one is right, then arguments for why this one's useful are um, not precise enough, not decisive enough.
So
So it,
I mean, it sounds like there's a big like difference there in terms of like usefulness versus correctness. Um, like Newton's theory of gravity is more useful if you wanted to code up a little like gravity simulator than doing like epicycle type stuff. Um,
I think
uh,
usefulness and correctness are very closely related because
mm,
so I would define correctness basically as relative to problems or so the same idea, like the same string of words, the same sentence can solve one problem and fail to solve a different problem, right?
mhm.
Like a particular sentence will be a correct answer to 7 questions and a incorrect answer to 7 other questions. So when it's a correct answer, it's also a useful answer. Um, like you can say it's correct for the things it's useful for, or something like that. Like the point of correctness or truth is that it actually works, it's effective, it's useful for that thing. It accomplishes a goal, it accomplishes a purpose, it achieves a purpose. That's what correct or true is.
Yep. it feels like, I mean, when talking about correctness like I just did, feels like it's distinct from the idea of truth, in that, uh, like we could say that something is more correct even though it's not true. Um, Truth is where like it really comes down to a binary choice. But correctness, I mean, I guess by saying ness, we're automatically sort of including a sort of degreeness in it as such.
So I think usefulness is also binary. When you look at a specific goal,
Mm,
then a solution either accomplishes that goal or it doesn't. So is this solution useful for that goal? Either yes or no. If the goal has, so this is what I was talking about earlier with people have vague goals and problems, right? So that leads into they run out of decisive arguments. So my answer to how do we get more decisive arguments? How do we get more decisive arguments? Number one answer, uh, let's do that. Number one answer is clear, precise goals. So, right, the earlier example is I want a pet. So suppose that we make the goal, I want a pet that costs under $30. You can now very easily evaluate, right, and I don't care about any other factors, right? Now we have a clear goal.
yep.
You can evaluate any potential solution. Is it a pet? Does it cost under $30? And you can actually get an up or down answer because the goal is now clear. So, someone proposes a $50 cat, right? Now you can reach a decisive answer.
Yep.
So in general, you make your goals more like this, and then you can always get decisive answers. A proper goal slash purpose slash problem categorizes all relevant like facts, states of reality, possibilities into two categories, success and failure. That's it. Like, either you've achieved the goal or you haven't.
Yep. So the quality of the goal is dependent upon its ability, like particularly the categorization of all states of reality sort of thing. That feels like the
Yeah.
key. And yeah, grayness only appears because we're not able to do that because it's not specific enough.
Yeah. And so we're never going to be infinitely precise. It takes too much work. But we can be precise enough to reach conclusions. And when we are having trouble reaching a conclusion, then we can add more precision. Similarly, I mentioned relevant facts because you could categorize everything irrelevant, but it's just extra work. So,
With no payoff. Yep.
yeah. So, goals are never infinitely precise, but if we get stuck and don't reach a conclusion, we can add more precision and detail and info, etc.
So
to
I can
get
sort of see this
unstuck.
when we have a more so the pet example we had above. Um, so we've got like if we took off the second half, and so it's just a pet that costs under $30,
Hmm.
then a $25 bird may or may not sort of satisfy that. Um, but then we've added this extra thing. I don't care about any other factors. Um, it sort of feels like we sort of get infinite precision from the I don't care about other factors, in that the first thing is exactly like something
Yeah,
is either equal, under, or not, right?
it's not quite infinite precision because, for example, one can debate which physical objects count as pets.
Okay, yep, yep, I see what you mean. Yeah, if I bought a rock for $25, you might still be unhappy.
Yeah, right. People have had pet rocks. That's the concept of some sort.
Some people are okay with it, yeah, but others, most not so. Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, this one's pretty damn precise. Like, I wouldn't expect to have precision problems with this in general. because it's a lot better than the sentences we're used to dealing with in our lives in general. So
Yep.
it's way above average, so it's probably going to be fine. Okay, and so when we judge whether something is a success or failure at the goal, it's always going to be fallible, but that should not stop us from reaching a conclusion. I think people get a bit distracted by fallibility sometimes. They're like, you might have made a math error when you're comparing the price of the pet to $30, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
you can never have a 100% guarantee, but what you can do is reach a conclusion that you don't know anything wrong with. And like no one has any objections, right? You get to a point where it's uncontroversial. Is one of the things you can do.
I feel like that sort of fallibility is like I feel like there's a difference in errors in computation from like logical or reasoning errors. Um, like I don't think they're a good they're so fallibility comes into it, but I don't think they're a good example of like fallibility. I think it's more of a distraction, if that makes sense. I don't know. I guess I see that that is sort of like a cheap out that you can sort of apply to anything. In that if we just say that all calculations are fallible, then well we can't, you know, everything is fallible by necessity because everything involves some calculations.
Yeah, I mean that's true, but it shouldn't stop us from reaching conclusions. It shouldn't like
Yes, I
really be a
agree.
problem. It's an equal problem with every single idea we have, and it's not really a problem. Like we can do science anyway. We've we've gotten to the moon anyways, so apparently it's not a deal breaker. Okay, yeah, so I don't care about any other factors is not realistic. It was just an example to show how if you have a convenient goal that's like really specific, it's much easier to get a decisive answer.
Yep, yep,
And the main reason people don't get decisive answers is because their goals look nothing like this. Their goals are things like, is capitalism or socialism better? I want to figure this out somehow. And
yep.
right, they need to, as part of figuring it out, they need to figure out actually what their criteria are. They need to work on like the goal or problem side as well as the other side where you're arguing for and against capitalism and so on. So they
So
need to define the problem better, not just come up with arguments.
it sounds like an a comparison like that, like better is so there's a few like points of ambiguity. One is what is capitalism, what is socialism, because obviously there's lots of different interpretations of that. But the word better seems to be the bigger issue for me in that well there's like that's a very like theory laden word because you've got to either take measurements or make judgments or whatever else, and by not putting that in the goal you don't have any way to actually evaluate it. um, because I mean, even with the ambiguity around capitalism and socialism as terms, people probably broadly agree on categorizing them, and we're not really interested in the gray area because we don't expect a compromise to be, you know, the right answer.
Okay, so yeah, working on problems in general. If you have trouble, don't just work on arguments like coming up with pros and cons and brainstorming other solutions candidate. Right? You also want to put some of your effort into making the problem more precise and figuring out what the problem actually is, what is the goal actually. Um, and that will help a lot with coming up with decisive answers instead of vague degree answers. So what is a more typical goal? A more typical goal is and also don't violate any of my standard default goals that I
Yeah,
have in my life. So people have as background context many goals. Like I don't want to be have a lot of bodily harm to myself. I don't want to die. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to lose my house. I don't want to lose my spouse. I don't want to lose my job.
yep.
Stuff like that. Right, so real goals in your life when it comes to action, right? It's not just an abstract goal, but it actually deals with action in your life in some way. Then you have like this long list of sort of standard goals that are attached to the problem. And we often don't mention them because we take them as implied. But like, obviously you don't want a pet that's going to kill you.
It occurs to me that by not including that explicitly, I feel like it's much easier for people to um, sort of so indirection and overreaching seem particularly important there, in that they're less likely to embrace indirection, whereas when you say, when you add in explicitly and don't violate all these other goals, then maybe, you need to work on one of the other goals or things. Also, if your other goals have errors, then this is going to, propagate, and maybe you can't find a solution that you're actually happy with because there's some more fundamental error in another goal. Yeah, and both of those things can stop us actually getting to an answer. But because we have this tendency to implicitly include all of them there and just sort of like presume that they're there and not list them explicitly either, those two things are much harder to do, or much harder for people to accept doing as part of the necessary actions to meet the goal.
Yeah, that is pretty important that there can be an error in the background context goals. Sometimes they need analysis, sometimes one of those has to change. So sometimes they need to be brought forward and be part of the actual discussion instead of just staying in the background. So also, when you don't state the background context goals, it allows moving the goalposts. It gives you a lot more flexibility and wiggle room to vary what they are and make different claims about what they are at different times as convenient and like be ad hoc, etc.
Yep.
However, stating them, too much work. Right, like there's a lot of them. Trying to actually precisely state them all the time would be way too much work. So you have to make a reasonable effort to state the relevant ones. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So now we have a better sense of what a goal really looks like, and it still allows us to have decisive argument. So next point is you can't think about too many things at once, so focus. We have like limited conscious attention. So how does this work with compound goals? Right, because when we add in all the background context, we're now dealing with a goal that has like 50 parts. Maybe it's 500 parts, who knows? It really depends how we formulate them, because we could say I don't want to die of drowning, I don't want to die of suffocation. We could have more goals, or we could just say I don't want to die and have fewer. Right, so the number isn't very meaningful. But anyways, there's a bunch of them. Right? But we can't think about so many things at once, so how do we do it?
So abstraction is the first. Well, actually, it's the only thing that's come to mind so far.
Yeah, so there's definitely general techniques like try to focus on the relevant parts and try to combine things into greater wholes so you have fewer things to worry about and like build up from parts into wholes. I have a more specific answer for this, which is so this is gold route related. Similar question to how do you deal with a chain with 50 plus links? Answer, 48 links have excess capacity, so they're easy. For
Okay. Yep.
most factors, you need significant buffers. Can't be very picky. Right, you want to have like a decent amount of excess capacity, a significant range that's okay, and if it's anywhere in that range, you just say, okay, it's good.
So we sort of like in some ways we've got like primary and secondary goals.
Yes. Yeah, so basically we have the primary goals are the ones where we're focusing conscious attention on them, and we're trying to optimize them and be specific and picky.
So if we apply this idea to the pet thing, maybe we could say like no dangerous pets. And if we were really picky, we could say, well, actually, there's like safe ways to keep a snake or things like that. But it's much easier just to say no snakes. Um, so if we, because there's buffer in the idea of pet, we can just eliminate big categories, even though some of them might be valid options, but they're not worth thinking about because we want to focus on the more important things, which are like, the price.
Yeah. So it's our choice what we want to focus our attention on, but we're not going to be able to focus our attention on everything at once. We have to pick like 1 to 5 factors, approximately, where we're going to focus our attention. And for the other stuff, we want to have excess capacity and have it not be a bottleneck and not even be close to a bottleneck so that we can deal with it pretty easily. And this is why we cannot even specify a lot of our secondary goals, and things still often come out okay, is because they have substantial excess capacity anyways. So most of the time they're just fine.
Yep.
This is
Yep.
this is a little bit of a metaphor, like, because like how do you have excess capacity on the not dying goal, for example? Because it's not really a thing where you have an amount of capacity, but it gives you the rough idea. Not dying is it's a thing that we're our general policies, habits, and intuitions are already very good at. So if we're following common sense, there's a very high chance we're not going to die already, with a lot
Mhm.
of room to spare. So, so like common sense living has excess capacity on the not dying factor.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay, right. So we want to find a few bottlenecks and focus our attention on those, and not focus our attention on the other stuff. And what if many things were bottlenecks, or what if we had very tight capacity on many factors? The answer is you're going to have an unstable system. It's like the balanced plant that Goldratt talks about, where you're planning to like get the maximum amount of work out of every station, and then that means every station lacks excess capacity, and it's just not going to work. You have to lower your standards or something.
Yep. You end up with a far more fragile system. So even if you do find
Yes.
a solution, then it's got to be incredibly specific. It's really hard to find. And then as soon as one thing has a minor disturbance, everything gets thrown out and you're back to square one.
Yeah, so that basically just doesn't work, and the only reason problem solving works in general is most of the factors are not fragile.
Yep.
They're not that hard to satisfy. And if you find yourself with too many hard factors, then you're probably not going to solve that problem immediately. You're going to have to work your way up by solving sub-problems and figuring out how to make some of the factors not fragile and deal with them more individually. Okay, what about so what I've been talking about right now is factors, uh, basically degree factors. Like I've talked about excess capacity, that implies there's a degree, there's a continuum there.
Hmm.
What about binary? There's also binary factors. You can have background factors that you're just dealing with in a pass-fail way. You could see not dying as a binary factor, potentially. You know, or staying within budget. You could treat staying within budget as a binary factor. It can be treated as a degree for how much money you spend. There's also binary, was I within my budget or not? So there's a problem. If we have binary factors, how do you have excess capacity? How are they non-fragile? And basically, they just have to be reasonably easy in the context of your life. So they're the kind of things that aren't that hard for you to accomplish. And if we're dealing with abstract stuff like philosophy ideas, then they'd have to be the kinds of factors that are not that hard for you intellectually. Like if you're trying to generate philosophy ideas meeting certain criteria, then you can have like a few hard criteria, and then you could have dozens of criteria that are pretty easy for you. Like you've already made hundreds of ideas that meet those criteria in the past.
So like, yeah, not contradicting, Newton's 3 laws of physics type thing.
Yeah, sure. Like not forgetting gravity exists, for example, would be easy. You're
Yep.
not going to be coming up with a bunch of physics theories where you like forget that things fall when they're on the Earth.
Yep.
So even if you view that in a binary way, did I forget gravity or not? It's still a factor where you have excess capacity. Essentially, it's not fragile.
So it's the excess capacity comes with like it's even though the goal or the problem is binary, the factor is binary, the excess capacity comes from like our ability to think.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is what the
our
easy
way
part.
of thinking and acting and our available resources and so on make it not that hard.
Yep. Yeah, okay. And then that means it definitely can't be the bottleneck. Because we can always deal with it with an ad hoc manner whenever it comes up. Like, did I forget gravity? Easy to check for, easy to evaluate. We don't need to put any preparation or anything into it. I think I've got it.
Okay. Yeah, so that is the basic problem-solving method, is you make the goals more specific, and you divide the goals into many factors, each of which you can evaluate in a binary way. So divide goals into many factors with binary evaluation. You can say for each of the things, did I fail or not? Basically, they're compound goals where you're anding many things together.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, arguably, if with non-binary factors or non-binary goals, you can do this to some to like arbitrary precision through like combinations of these ANDing sort of operations.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So next factor is, what about analog factors like price, right? Because you can say this one costs more than that one, which costs more than that one, and you can get like this continuum of prices. You can say the less I spent, the nicer it'd be.
Yep.
So
So something like a computer is a good example where maybe you'd spend more if it was a really good deal, but you know, you'd prefer to spend less, and the less the better.
yeah. So my answer to this is there are ways to convert the analog factors into binary factors. So all analog factors, or at least all reasonable valid ones, and not only that, they also should be. Yeah, which reminds me, you can convert all positive arguments into negative ones, which is another important point that we might get to later. Anyways, so yeah, analog factors can be converted into binary factors. How do you do this? The basic method is breakpoints. And it's not just that they can be. Okay, so this is basically how people deal with analog factors at all, is without understanding that there's a conversion or what the issues are, they're kind of doing a conversion.
So one of the things that occurs to me is, so with like negotiating something, you could spend a lot of time trying to, get down on nitty-gritty stuff, but people will have this like, this is my like line and nothing over that is worth it. And so you can very quickly figure out whether you're in that range, as opposed to trying to figure out whether the exact amount that you're negotiating over or whatever is acceptable. Like that's sort of a way to turn the analog goal to binary.
Yes. Right, so like with the pet thing, if you simply declare, more than $30 is too much and less than $30 is okay, now we have a binary factor. So you can just pick a cutoff. But that might sound a bit arbitrary. So what you want to look for is you want to look for discontinuities. When the value passes a certain point, you get a discontinuous jump. It's not just incrementally different, but there's some like notable difference. Discontinuities are the thing that help us figure out like what numbers matter and what ranges matter. They let us group things together into categories.
Yep.
So for example, if I'm going to a party, I might arrive at different times, and that's a continuum of different times I could arrive at. However, I could group them into early, medium, and late. And those are three categories that are conceptually meaningful. And there's a kind of discontinuity between being early, so people are like, why is he here so early? He must have nothing better to do. And being medium, so people are like, oh, he's pretty cool. Like you get an actual conceptual difference.
Yep.
Instead of just a slight degree difference.
Okay, yeah. So I was initially thinking of, I think, a weaker version, like if you're going to a wedding, then the like arrival time gets worse the earlier you are, but then if you're after the ceremony, then it's too late. And that's sort of like a breakpoint, but it also makes sense to even within something that looks more continuous, you could have other breakpoints of like the early, medium, late type thing.
Yeah. So you have to try to find reasons that certain values on the continuum are important. And this lets you focus your thoughts, because you cannot think about infinite things and continuums have infinite points. So continuums do not work for thinking fundamentally because you cannot think about all the points. You're never going to fit them all in your head as possibilities. So one thing people do is they look at, for example, every integer value. They just say we're going to round everything. Rounding is a simplistic way to get like pseudo breakpoints. They aren't conceptual breakpoints. You're not actually finding important points, but at least now you have fewer things to think about. You're just arbitrarily throwing most out when you round to nearest 1 or 10 or
Yep. So with the pet, we could say, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. It's not
yeah.
that there's actually specific. Yeah, there's nothing special about a pet that's worth $9 compared to $11, but less is involved to hold in your head all at once to
Yeah.
evaluate things.
So this is a technique people use a reasonable amount.
Yep.
And it's better than nothing because you actually can't think if you wouldn't even do this. And you're actually looking at an infinite continuum. But it's not great. But if you're totally stuck, you can do this. If you don't have something better, this is your backup. Is you just make up arbitrary breakpoints and use those. So yeah, basically, if you're stuck, arbitrary breakpoints are your backup plan. Better than nothing. Just space them out even. Right. If you can't come up with any sort of discontinuity or asymmetry or whatever, then you should space out your breakpoints symmetrically or evenly because you have no basis to do it in any other way.
Yeah, okay. Does so if we had uh like one thing that occurs to me is sometimes we'll like if we have some continuous relationship, people might plot it on a log graph, or where the y-axis is rescaled according to a log scale as opposed to linear. Um,
Oh, yeah, if you have like an exponential and you're trying to round, you would have to do it in a different way instead of actually linear evenly breakpoints.
so I don't think this is it's obviously not incompatible, but this is like a little bit extra detail. So there's sort of like a special case of this where if you have a bit of an explanation about things, but you still don't know what to do, then you can sort of rescale a bit, and that might give you a bit better than just evenly spacing them. Um, but really, it's only a moderately better option than like if we're out of all other options.
Yeah, for exponentials or other stuff that's not linear, I think what you do is you just space it linearly on the inputs. So
Yep.
like,
Okay.
you got what I mean?
Yep. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Or it's definitely the easier option. I
There
mean,
might be something cleverer. I don't know a ton of that math, but it seems like a reasonable place to start at least.
yeah. I mean, there are like log graphs, but they're sort of a pointless special case, I think, at this point. It's
Okay.
definitely the simplest approach. Yep.
All right. So we've got this breakpoint idea. Rounding is our backup plan. And I think the rounding thing is important when people are doing like I have 80% confidence. I think if you really look at their thought process, it's certainly not a number from 1 to 100. Like there are not 101 possible outcomes.
They're never going to say 81% confidence. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's more like 11, like they're rounding to the nearest 10, something like that. And I
Yep.
think that it is bad to express more precision than you actually have. When you say it's 80 out of 100, you're implying a level of precision. And if it's really an 8 out of 10, you should say 8 out of 10. I know that like using percents is very standard and people are used to them, but I think the way that they're misleading about precision is a real problem.
Yep. Well, I know that
Yeah,
there have been like Bayesians who have written particularly about like about the sort of number of significant figures that one should use in their thing and stuff like that. Um,
yeah, some people are aware of that. So I think it matters because it obscures how finite and digital the stuff you're dealing with is. Like if there are 11 possibilities, if we're mapping something onto an integer from 0 to 10, we're a lot of the way to binary already. You know? That's not actually similar to a continuum.
hmm,
Whereas when people hear percentages, they think continuum, they think maps to real numbers. But if it maps to 11 integers or even 101 integers, that's nothing like a continuum. I mean, 101 is kind of in the middle. It's getting a little continuum-y, but 11 isn't. 11 is fundamentally similar to binary, um, where you're in the realm where error correction works again.
yep.
Right? Error
Um,
correction does not require binary. It requires digital, and in particular, like a reasonably small number digital, I think, is important. Because if you have like millions and millions, you're in trouble. It's similar to a continuum.
so one of the things that occurs to me just from back in like psychology, 7 plus minus 2, like that paper and the resulting like everything that's come out, like no one makes surveys with more than 9 options for what to do, because they at least realize that anything more than that is just noise. People can't really hold more than 7 distinct things, maybe a bit more if they've practiced or whatever, but they can't really hold more than 7 distinct things in their head, and it's really hard to, especially off the cuff, to judge anything with a higher degree than 7, or a higher
Yes.
number of
Yeah,
possible options.
exactly. So that gets into the focus stuff. You have to narrow down the actual things you're thinking about to Yeah, around 7 or fewer. And Peikoff talks about that a lot, the objectivist. He calls
Mhm.
it the crow epistemology. I think there was some study with a crow where the crow could deal with like 7 things at once. It was like the crow
Okay.
could solve problems with 7 steps, but not 8 steps or something. So he calls it crow epistemology. And the idea is you can only think about 7 things at once. You can only hold that many in your head.
Yeah, okay. The crow study wouldn't surprise me. There's lots of research on birds and simple problem solving and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
Another fun thing is we can usually count 5 objects instantaneously, but more than 5, and we need to break them up. So another
Yeah, that sounds like a
about that thing.
reasonable approximation of our abilities. Yeah. Right. So if you're mapping your percentages actually to 11 numbers, or possibly say 6 numbers, maybe you're really rounding to the nearest 20 or the nearest 25 or something. Right? We're actually getting down towards where humans can actually focus.
Yep, yep.
Okay, so there's various standard things with breakpoints that are pretty important. So one is maximization problems. And minimization problems are equivalent. You just throw a negative in front, like maximize the maximize -1 type something, and you can do minimization. I
Yep.
don't treat it as a separate category. Um, so maximization problems get you to binary. You can look at all your candidate solutions, and you can calculate their value, and you can maximize one factor. You can maximize some combination of factors, like with conversion factors, like 7x plus 3y plus z. Right? You can maximize many factors with conversion factors. So you calculate for all the candidate solutions, then you can yes or no all of them. Find find the highest value, know anything that doesn't output that value.
Conversion there. So as in particularly the ability to convert between the factors. Um,
Yeah,
and this is distinct from convergent.
so a conversion factor is 1 hour of my time is worth $100.
Yeah, okay, yep.
So I'm going to maximize the amount of time and so I'll maximize like the negative of the amount of time I spend and the negative amount of dollars I spend, and I'll multiply the hours by 100.
Yep.
So we'll maximize negative 100t minus 100 or minus dollars t. Right, so we just maximize that, and now we're using this conversion factor from time to dollars. Conversion factors are pretty hard to be really precise with, but they work okay sometimes. But it's fundamentally a hard problem to convert a bunch of factors onto the same scale. This is
Yep.
actually a very important thing with the whole approach. With the compound goals. So the point of compound goals is you don't convert everything into a single score. Right, so degree epistemology converts these all factors into one score, but conversion is hard. Binary, decisive, yes, no epistemology uses compound goals, so you can have many different factors on different scales or dimensions and never convert them to be equivalent. Never directly compare them. You don't have to say how many philosophy knowledge is worth $1.
Yep. It also occurs to me that some of the problems you get into with conversion factors, while like there's no limit on the number of dollars, but you've got a limit on the number like on your time. Like you probably can't do more than like 13 hours a day for very long without, you know, becoming exhausted or whatever else.
Yeah, you
And
can
so
throw
you
that
can,
into the maximization things. Like you can say maximize this under the condition that x is less than 5 and y is greater than 7 and whatever.
So conversion factors have a similar property to stuff we were talking about earlier with like their sort of approximations where we can sort of continually increase precision, but it's not worth doing so unless we run into problems with it. Like getting an answer like I should spend 27 hours a day, where obviously we need to do something to fix that problem.
Yeah, so this is an article on why conversion factors are hard. Article on why converting factors is hard. I'm going to put this in Discord and tutoring.
Cool.
So it deals with comparing cars, and it deals with college rankings. These are both issues where you can come up with many, many factors to evaluate a college or a car, but it's very hard to make a single final ranking.
Yep.
So yeah, I'll write that down real quick. So examples are cars and college rankings. Very easy to come up with many factors, very hard to make a single final score. And you need a single final score if you want to rank them in a list, a ranked list, rather than giving yes or no outcomes to them.
I had a question about maximization problems getting to binary just before we get too far away from it.
Sure.
So maximization feels similar to optimization, and optimizing things like there's a optimization can hide or it can be bad and misleading and lead us to bad compromises, essentially.
Yes, I agree.
And I guess yeah, it feels like there's the potential to confuse the two. Or is it that it's safe in this regard because we're
It's
only
not
applying maximizing to sorry, yep.
it's not especially safe in general. I'm not especially recommending it. I'm just saying it's doable. It's an option. It's not hard wrong. People like wonder this or ask this. They're like, don't we maximize things? And it's like, yes, you can. It's not always wrong. It's compatible with my system, is kind of the point. But I agree with you that it is often a bad idea. It's overrated.
It seems as well that the part where it becomes really bad is not when you have a non-controversial way of converting between things, it's when you don't. And that's where you get the bad
Yeah,
conflicts or the bad compromises because you're not able to actually, you know, measure how happy you make socialists with a certain tax bracket and how happy you
yeah,
make capitalists type thing. Like those, you can't find a good compromise there,
yeah.
or something like that.
It's going to be completely broken at that point. But you can sometimes find conversion factors that are useful, like if you look at the price of the pet and you look at how much time it takes to take care of the pet, and you look at how much money it costs to feed the pet, you could maybe convert those three factors into one factor and come out with something when you estimate like the lifetime of the pet and so on. And just
Yep.
convert, like a decent number of things convert into dollars. That tends to be one of the best things to convert into. Also
You
time.
need
Time
you
is
need
decent.
extra theories to do that though, which
Yes.
are yeah, particularly on if there's multiple people might be more involved and you know not something that you can actually agree on. Like there might be more foundational problems that you realize there. Um, yeah. So yeah, I don't think this brings up particularly many important points. It's just
Yeah.
or crucial
It,
points. But it adds texture, sort of.
in
Yeah.
more narrow contexts, you can sometimes find lots of conversion factors that work pretty well. Like you could play a video game where you have like power-ups, and you could find that like having a particular power-up is worth having two of a different power-up that's like equally good for winning the game.
Yep. 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 Like
And
yeah, and
because it's a narrow enough context, it lets you convert more easily because there's like less of the complexity of reality to get in the way.
yep. So like it's worthwhile losing your fire flower at this point to pick up the Tanuki wing or Tanuki tail,
Yeah.
etc. But if the route changes, then that might throw that out, etc. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so conversions hard but possible, sometimes useful. Especially in narrow contexts. Especially works well in narrow contexts with limited complexity. The more you get into the full complexity of reality, the harder it is to convert. Okay, so broad point here is the use of compound goals means you don't have to convert everything into a single scale. This is very important, that you never convert, you just... So I'm going to get a spreadsheet. Okay, so this is in the yes or no philosophy stuff. Decision chart. Factor 1, or criteria 1, criterion 1, criterion 2, and 3, then candidate 1.
Do you mind if we take a quick break? I'm just going to get a drink and go to the bathroom.
Okay, yeah.
Cool. All right, back to you.
Hi, Super Kevin. I'm doing philosophy tutoring stuff. Let me give you a link. Right now we're talking about yes or no philosophy stuff, and here's my website in general that links to a bunch of articles. Okay, so I was making a decision chart.
Yep, cool.
Okay, so you use binary criteria, and then you can give passes and fails, like 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, and 1, 1, 1. Then you can have compound columns where you have multiple goals. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and a background. I guess we should have a background column. All background goals pass, right? And then we put 1, 1, 1, 1.
Yep.
And then we go to this column and we got 0, 0, 0, 1. And if this is our goal, then we should use idea 4. Idea 4 passes. And so to do this, we never put criteria 1, 2, and 3 on the same scale. That's the important thing. For each one, for each of the criteria, we found either a directly binary way to deal with it, like I want a blue cat, is the cat blue, is directly binary. Or we found some sort of breakpoint or discontinuity on a continuum. So my budget allows me to spend up to X dollars, so does it cost less than X? Okay, so if you use criteria like this and compound goals like this, then you ought to have a decent time of evaluating your candidate ideas, and giving them pass-fail marks in every column for individual criteria or compound criteria.
Yep.
So this leaves several problems open. So one of the problems is, what if no solutions pass? What if many solutions pass? What if we're not sure which compound goal we want? So a lot of times your compound goal is not going to be all of the criteria. It's going to be, I don't know, like 7 criteria or something. Like pick
Okay,
7.
yeah. As in, if it's under $30, then this applies, and if it's over $30, then this applies. That sort of idea.
Yeah, sure. Or just because you can't get everything. Like you might find if you try for all the criteria, it's just impossible. And you're like, I'm gonna have to pick some criteria that I really want and give up some of the other ones as non-goals.
Yep. So there's sort of becoming less picky, and then having maybe multiple options for less pickiness. In that, I still
Yeah.
want at least
Like
7 of these, but I'm willing to give up 1 of these 3 or whatever else.
yeah, and you can do that in coherent ways. You can find that certain factors go with each other, like for some conceptual reason. So we're not just like arbitrarily removing some columns to make it easier. We're finding conceptual reasons why we can give something up, or you might decide that you're not going to be picky in a certain way, and then you find like 3 different factors were related to that way. So you can give them all up together if you can accomplish that chilling out.
Yep. And so even if we can't come up with conversion factors between them, they might be linked via some explanation, and that allows us to
Yeah.
sort of do some of the things that we would be able to do with a conversion factor, but can't do without disagreements, or can't do safely. But then we can do it if we become less picky.
Okay, so the easiest one, so we'll start there, is what if many solutions pass? What do you do? You have 2 choices, and it's really your option. Option 1 is pick any. It's fine. This is what we do most of the time, because most things we don't actually really want to optimize and spend a lot of time on. We do lots and lots of small things per day. We deal with tons of easy problems in our life that a lot of people don't even think of as problems.
Yep.
So
So
the
like
vast majority of the time, we just find a good enough solution and we do it.
so what I do in the morning, I could have coffee and then have breakfast, or I could have breakfast and then have coffee, but it's irrelevant really which one I do. So I just take whichever's closest or whatever.
Yes. Right. And then option 2 is consider more goal criteria, make a more ambitious compound goal. And you can consider many different options and then see which ones you actually have solutions for that would work, and then you can pick the most ambitious one that you have a solution for. But you can
Yep.
also look for better solutions if you want to. Like
So
as you start thinking about more ambitious goals, it might inspire you to come up with a better solution that's going to meet more of them or something. So you can go
that
back and forth between improving the goals and improving the candidate ideas.
sounds like maybe a soft technique as well for the like if you don't find you have any solutions, and so you start being less picky, then that process may actually then result in coming up with a new option that does satisfy more.
Yeah, so it's very similar to conjecture and criticism where you go back and forth,
Yep.
because the candidate ideas are the conjectures and the criteria are the criticism. They're the ways that we can rule things out. Yeah, so there's a strong equivalence between the goal criteria and criticism. A criticism is a thing that says this idea will fail for this purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's what criticism actually is. So we're figuring out what problems does an idea solve or not solve. Which ones is it criticized for, and which ones is it not criticized?
Yep.
Okay, so having too many solutions isn't so bad. You can basically just get pickier or not. And in general, we calibrate our goals to our abilities. This is a thing we do in our lives, just completely in general. Because if it was totally arbitrary, you get huge mismatches all the time, like infinitely sized mismatches.
Yeah, we'd be stuck in forever, essentially.
Yeah, it's like how poor people's kids do not ask them for a yacht.
Yeah.
They ask them, like, can we go to McDonald's again? They ask for things that are actually realistic or close to realistic. Things that they've
Yep.
seen other people have and stuff like that. So I have two articles related to this, which are wanting things and children's ignorance. So you might like to read those and consider them in this capacity. They're about sort of children start out not wanting too much when they're born, and their wants and their skills should develop in parallel and sort of stay in sync. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, it's sort of, I mean, it's before they've developed fine motor skills, they're unlikely to ask for Lego. Or if they do
Yes.
ask for Lego, they'll very rapidly realize that,
Yeah. People get out of sync on that stuff at some point in their lives in general, though, and it causes a lot of trouble.
Yep.
Okay, so what if no solutions pass? Then you can brainstorm more solutions, and you can brainstorm more solutions in general, like in general. You can brainstorm specific solutions to individual criteria or small sets of criteria. You can break it down and be like, if my goal was just this one part, how would I solve it? Can I come up with any solution at all for this column? And
Yep.
that's a good way to get unstuck. So like,
Well, particularly
helps you
if like
get unstuck.
if you had or if you broke down things like the spreadsheet there and you had like zeros in one column particularly, then that would seem like a much more effective way of trying to find what to do in the case that no solutions pass.
Yeah. If one of the columns is all zeros, you're like, okay, well, I'm getting stuck because this one is hard. And then if you have trouble thinking of a solution that's like ones all across the board, you can say, well, can I think of a solution that is a one in this column only and fuck every other column? Can I at least do that? That's easier to start with.
Yep. And if you can't do that, then that indicates it was always going to be unlikely you were going to come up with something that satisfies everything. Maybe the thing is impossible. You get more information about the problem and you can actually focus on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so then, okay, and then when you solve a problem, there are multiple ways to solve it that and you can categorize them. And one of the categorizations that's pretty useful is we could call it a direct solution, where you're solving it in the intended way, and an indirect solution. So suppose the problem is going to Disneyland. Okay, so example, going to Disneyland. Direct solution will get you there. Gets you transportation, hotel, tickets, etc. Indirect solution does something else, e.g., finding a way to be okay with not going or with a virtual tour. So an indirect solution is a way that it's no longer a problem for you. Like you're not coerced about not going, you're not sad about it. But you didn't actually go, so you found like a workaround.
Yep. So this might
Wait,
be oh yep, sorry, go on.
yeah, so I was just gonna say that besides brainstorming solutions, you can brainstorm workarounds for particular criteria goals. Right? So if you're getting stuck on direct solutions, you can look for these sort of indirect solutions. How can we make failing at a particular goal in the direct sense actually be okay, which is a type of solution.
Yep. So like if someone wanted a new car and you had various options, but there were no, like, one of the criteria was that it needed 7 seats and there were no minivans available. One of the workarounds might be that you buy a small bus instead. Even though that, wasn't in your original set because of a car, it actually satisfies this, and maybe it's still good enough to actually answer it. This gets back to some of the over specificity / under specificity type stuff we were talking about earlier, with making things easy and then coming back to them when there were problems. So that, yeah, is one of the ways maybe workarounds add.
Yeah. Okay, so we have half hour left. Before we run out of
Yep.
time, is it important for your working on stuff before next session that we go over anything? Like, should we get to something now so you don't get stuck?
I feel like, so I don't think I've got any particular issues with going through the choice. That feels more just a matter of time and focus. Um, Grammar stuff I feel pretty comfortable with. I don't think I had any problems with. We can go over like some of the last ones or whatever, but I feel like it's um, maybe it's worth quickly having a look at one of those. I did have,
Okay.
as an alternate idea for today. I did have, so I added some like ideas that I've been thinking about. Some of them are like harder in that, I mean, this has nothing in it, but there's just, thinking about it, talking about Zaz and so on. I had this, or, slowly developed over the past few years, this idea of like why depression would be or, what's called depression be selected for evolutionarily. That's a much harder one, but another one um, was uh, starting to go through like fleshing out like my like ideas or impressions from early learning on objectivism, in that I haven't really ever tried to research it before. Um, so I was planning on posting this to once I'd actually written it out. This is like one of the things that I was going to bring up, in that uh, I mean, there's potentially lots of stuff that's a problem with this, in terms of, I've got like the Google definition and then Wikipedia and whatever else. Anyway, I thought I'd mention that just for background. That's not important to do today. Um, but I don't think there's anything particular that's blocking me, except
Okay.
maybe just checking that I'm not making huge mistakes on the grammar stuff.
Okay. I think that nuclear power is safe. Yeah, so is safe doesn't have to be grouped together. You're grouping like verb and complement.
You mean that we could like is safe can oh, I see what you mean, as in yeah, I mean, I think I'd point out, yeah, what is power doing is being, so I actually break them down there. But yeah, no, that's right. That's actually inconsistent with the way that I deal with things the rest of the time, I think.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty standard grammarians group verbs with their objects or complements quite a bit. And they see them as much more strongly grouped with their object or complement than with their subject.
Yeah. That feels intuitive to me.
Yeah, I de-emphasize that a bit. I think it's a bit overdone. So, like, I make the verb the root, whereas the more common thing is to say that the subject and the verb are equal.
Yep. No, I think the way that we do it is more principled. But I can sort
Okay.
of understand. It makes less sense to group it with the subject, definitely, if you were going to group it with anything. I
Yeah.
think I was probably thinking prepositional phrase here, in part, which is why I grouped it. Um, Something like that. I mean, that hasn't yet particularly persisted because I've like correctly identified it as B.
Yep.
Um, but
All
yeah,
right,
that was
let's look at the
probably what.
previous one. While you are having a discussion, never misquote anyone. So I'd commonly group are having I think those go together a lot. Like the verbs work together to figure out what the action is.
Yeah, okay. So even I
But
sort of presumed having
what
was
you're
a
doing is not
gerund.
wrong. Because you can view having as the object of R, so this is completely valid. But a more standard grouping would be R having together, and then a discussion as the object of having be separate.
So even though having is like with ing there, is it not a gerund?
Yeah, that's a gerund, but people treat verbals as having is the main topic of the sentence, so they view it in some sense as the main verb, even though it's not the main verb grammatically. So they like to say, the set of verbs together form the having action with a tense, and
Yep.
so they like to group those together and say that the R is auxiliary, and then yeah, but
That I mean, yeah, that feels less principled because then there's trouble with like gerunds acting as nouns and or being nouns, I guess.
yeah,
Uh,
I think it's
so
good to understand both ways. I think that their stuff will come up, and it's a reasonable
yeah,
perspective. It's a standard way of thinking about English, even if it's less principled. It's common, it's well known, and it works okay. So it's good to know both ways. So yeah, this way's fine too, where you just say that having is the object of R.
yep. I ended up with the questions like trying to uh, I found that it was just difficult to write questions without having intermediate sort of things. So, like, what should you do when satisfying the condition? Never misquote anyone. It's much easier to then talk about or ask questions about the misquote, the never, the anyone, um, like with that as the sort of a thing. So I've added that in essentially to some of the
Yeah,
questions.
you can do it single word at a time, and it's worth being able to, but it's not always the most convenient. So like here, what would you do in satisfying the condition? You could say misquote. The answer is misquote. That is the action. What type of
Yep,
misquoting? Never. So it's negated. Negations are very important modifiers, but you can give
that's
misquote as the primary action.
that was one of the reasons that I wanted to put it down first was that it, yeah. So I've got like the main action concerned misquote, but it felt wrong to treat it as like the question of like what should you do when satisfying
Yeah,
the condition misquote feels like not like feels untrue to the sentence essentially. So
yeah.
that's why I sort of
It's
it's a bit
it's
awkward
fine
there.
grammatically, but it clashes with the content of the sentence because never is just so important.
Yeah, it's not even like try not to misquote. It's not a soft negation. It's a
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, also, so having a discussion is a subphrase that you could mark if you wanted to. So the object of having is the group a discussion.
So if you go further up, just to the top of just under John and Olivia, I've got the note their favorite song on the stage. Like unsure if I should mark like the three phases with the phrases with the nested phrases. And
Yeah,
so I think I decided to go with the not to do like bigger nested phrases, particularly because you could get to a weird like complexity. Um,
yeah. It's good to try it a couple times and just make sure you understand it. But then most of the time you're not going to want to mark phrases that much. You try to figure out which phrase markings are relevant and only mark those is what you're normally going to do when analyzing.
Yep. It's also those are the phrases that would be good candidates for um like removing large chunks of in the outline. In that if we have lots of nested phrases, then it's likely we can remove a lot of them, is my well, it's my intuition at least.
Yeah, because when you have a lot of phrase nesting, you tend to have a lot of modifiers, and modifiers are usually what get removed from outlines the most.
Yep. So I didn't actually finish that analysis just because I was worried that I was running out of time. So I've just put it to do down the bottom. But I didn't think that it was complex enough to be worried about.
Okay. Yeah, so this looks fine. I think you've got the main ideas.
Yep, cool. Yeah, it's felt uh yeah, sort of it's come very easily the last few times I've done the exercises.
Yeah,
which I'm sort of
grouping
happy about.
is something that you should be very familiar with from programming already, and being able to like put parentheses around some group of something and understanding how that works.
Yep.
But it's something that normal people often like they mostly can do it somewhat and have some intuition about it. Like a random adult, they're gonna have some understanding of grouping. But there's often some like holes or flaws in it, and it can lead to problems in philosophy discussions where they're actually having some errors related to it. It's not
Yep.
consistent enough, reliable enough. But yeah, decent programmers should have that down already, hopefully, because of like nested blocks and stuff.
Cool. The only other thing that before if we want to go back to yes no stuff, um, so and maybe it's just worth mentioning and not actually getting into. One of the things that's occurred to me is this solves or like going through yes no. One of the so with like Flux, the system of democracy we have is so it's already binary in that we don't deal with preference stuff like
Uh-huh.
deliberately. That in large part was just inspired by the stuff in BOI because of the paradoxes that you get when you try and do rank preferencing. Um,
Yeah, BOI helped inspire Yes No. It has anti-weighting stuff in one particular chapter, and it has the idea about like not compromising ideas and like mixing them and they don't mix well. But it was especially the stuff about weighing.
yeah, I had a note here earlier about the like the compatibility with hard to vary sort of thing in that you can sort of so that feels very anti-weighing because if it wasn't anti-weighing, then you could have something that was like 99% as good. Um, whereas the idea of like hard to vary, if you can remove something without diminishing, then it's just exclusively better. There's no weight where the other one is like okay in comparison. Um, like if I had some theory about, you know, how the world seasons or how seasons worked, and then tack something onto the side, um, uh, the to say that it was like 95% correct would be like disingenuous to the core of the idea. Um, uh, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, DD unfortunately did not make the connection to say that the concept of a strong or weak argument is a type of weighing of argument strength.
yeah. No, I remember. I'm just trying to think. There's actually like specifically he talks about weighing, um, right? I feel like I don't know in the chapters 4 to 7 somewhere around there. Um,
No, it's later. It's in the
it's later.
voting chapter, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, the 13 or 12 or whatever it is. Choices. Okay, yep. Um, I know that yeah, there's definitely stuff about uh
Oh,
preferencing
here he
there
talks about
to it.
outweighing in a positive context in evolution, about survival advantages outweighing like survival disadvantages.
I sort of feel like that makes more sense in this in that
Yeah,
like
be-
evolution is the mistake that we've been like talking about in terms of everything is converging on one element, which is does it live or does it live till breeding age or die type thing.
yes, exactly. In that case, there actually is a conversion factor of sort. There's a way to get it all onto the same scale.
Yep. At least I mean, yeah, I guess it's a weird sort of conversion factor in that it's different for every life form or every like being and at every different time and in any different sort of thing. Like I guess in the same way that like genetics creates parochial knowledge typically, and that this is like weird and not easy to put into words because it's sort of this weird pseudo arbitrary noisy sort of implicit knowledge. Um, like that's what the conversion factor is. It's got the same properties there.
Yeah, so like this paragraph right here is very yes no oriented. Um, But DD does not take it like much further than this. And I have in the yes no product there are quotes from DD's books showing how he contradicts and disagrees with yes no in other statements and stuff.
Yep. That's actually one thing that I've been like thinking, or that I've thought about on and off for like it was one of the first things I Googled after reading BOI, once I was like thinking about it more, digesting the full experience, was looking for criticisms of BOI and like not finding any. I found some other things that people had written about it. Um, but I didn't find your side actually, which is sort of curious. Pun not intended, just that maybe a
Yeah,
Google thing.
I think that Google's deplatforming has gone back many, many years and has affected search rankings and that kind of thing, and has
It's
materially affected my audience in very subtle ways.
it feels like it's very easy for Google to do that, and particularly not even to realize that they're doing it and to evade the topic by because of the
Yeah,
way that they do like PageRank sort of thing, or whatever they call their algorithm, is like the equivalent of one big conversion factor into a thing. And so if you have, like a little half percentage sort of like detraction on various elements, then it's very easy for Google to do that without even realizing that they're doing it as such, without consciously
yeah.
doing it.
It's very impersonal. It's not to do with me. I'm not their target, but it's
No,
just like the emergent consequences of the kinds of things they like and dislike that are not favorable to me. And it's gotten worse over time. I don't know exactly when it started or whatever, but like recently I found out that they were heavily deranking an article because it talked about genetics and IQ. And it happened to be
yep,
on their side, but they didn't even fucking know. Like they just see the keywords and blacklist it.
yeah, yep.
I mean, not
No,
exactly on their side, but to a first approximation, it was on their side of the debate.
it's definitely like I think did you have a video on that? But you mentioned that it's arguing against
Yeah.
Charles Murray's bell curve,
Yes. Yes.
which Google is broadly against. Yep.
Yeah. But they hate the bell curve, so they blacklist things that talk about it
Yeah. Um,
indiscriminately.
so uh, criticisms of VOI. So it occurs to me, I was thinking about this the other day for related to another thing, and uh, like I think there was once I posted once about finding a not exactly a typo type thing, but it was a reference to a century where it was just like an off by one error, um, which I'm not sure anyone replied to because it's not really significant. But yes no would be like I don't know of any other significant criticisms of VOI in that. I mean, not that yes no is directly a criticism, but it's obviously heavily
Oh,
related to criticisms of weighting sort of
I
elements.
have some significant ones. One is that it encourages overreaching. It doesn't tell people what it takes to understand the book itself. It just presents a bunch of ideas that the general reader, who's presented as being for, is actually not going to understand, and they're going to read the book and think, "I read the book, I did what I was supposed to, I should now understand it." It doesn't warn them that this is completely wrong.
Yep, yep. It's sort of yeah, I can see like how it's broadly compatible with like deeper processes of understanding, but that it's marketed as a pop science book as such. I think
Yeah,
that's actually like the category you find it in, which
yeah.
is it's a pretty exceptional pop science book.
That is, of course, a very generic criticism that applies to
Delivery.
many, many other books. It's not something about BOI in particular. It's just a common flaw in books
Mm.
that he didn't fix. But like, you could make the same complaint about Popper
Yeah, yeah.
and
Well,
pretty much
arguably,
everyone good.
it's hard to publish a book and have it be successful remotely if you put too much of like overreaching stuff at the beginning. It's probably not going to attract too high an audience as such.
Yeah. Um.
Not that the book would be less successful by some goals, less successful from the publisher's point of view, maybe.
Yeah. By the way, I noticed the other day that Goldrat names Popper in the choice as the person who told us how science works.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I remembered it because you're asking about BOI criticisms, and somewhere near here in the text, um, without using the words hard to vary, is the idea of hard to vary. Um, it is not an original idea. I don't think it's original to Goldratt either. But I think that DD presents it as much more original than it is.
Hmm.
And he also
Well,
presents it as much more unique or important than it is. Whereas my opinion at the time that he was making the book, or like later phases, is it's just one of many equivalent ways of talking about what knowledge is. It's a slightly different perspective on what knowledge is, but it's not the best one. It shouldn't be given that sort of prominence. There's nothing
so
particularly special about it compared to, say, adaptation as a concept.
I feel like one of the sort of reasons it might be more specific or more important than that is to do with correcting particular mistakes that people make in their thinking. So if you've already corrected that mistake, it seems less significant than it would to someone who still has that mistake. Like I found it like a pretty profound concept in the scheme of things, and I found it really foundational in terms of trying to re-explain things to people. Um, but that probably has like a lot, or that probably reflects a lot of like my history as opposed to the objective significance of it. Um,
I've seen
yeah,
it misused a lot, so I fear that it sounds easy to understand, but a lot of people aren't actually getting it.
yeah,
I think it
I've
might be
definitely
somewhat optimized in that way.
I've definitely misused some ideas in BOI. Like even only moral imperative is not to destroy methods of correcting mistakes. Like I've misused that and then realized that I was not interpreting it wrongly, but that I was applying it like 180 degrees backwards to how I should. Um, that was shortly after reading the book, like less than a year, I think, something like that. Um, yeah, it is really easy to misuse ideas from BOI.
Yeah, I've seen people take it and use it kind of like a slogan, and in a debate, they'll accuse ideas of being easy to vary, and they'll have a lot of trouble saying why it's easy to vary or giving examples or anything, like substantiating it. They just sort of use it as a way to attack things, which is
Yeah.
really superficial.
Um, that's not to say that it's the like doing it well is impossible though, right? Um,
Yeah, no,
like
if you're understanding it correctly, it's fine. Like it's not wrong.
I see what you mean. Yep. Um, I've used it. Sometimes I have used it incorrectly like that, where I've just like used it as a way to try and shut someone down, and maybe it or disregard an idea. Um, yeah, I can't think of specific examples though, but I know I've done that. Um, the I do mention like in the actually was this the first parallels? Yeah, so the first in terms of what do you call it? The choice. The first time I think I put down the parallels to BOI. The first thing was this like in chapter 3 he talks a lot about the elegance um of things, which I think that's where hard to vary comes from, probably in terms of the strongest like heritage of the idea is that elegance implies some element of that. It's not strictly the same thing and it's not as explicit because people think that like
I doubt it.
Occam's
I think
razor.
it's from
Okay.
evolution.
Okay.
So the way adaptation works is most variants of an adapted trait. If it's highly adapted, then most random variants would be worse instead of better. That's the basic idea of adaptation, right?
Yep.
So like most potential genetic mutations would make it less fit instead of more fit.
Yep.
So that is basically a way of saying hard to vary. It is hard to vary that trait. Most random variations are going to make it worse instead of better.
So is that that feels I mean, I guess I wonder when that sort of came about. Like Richard Dawkins obviously did a lot of stuff around selfish gene and around that time. So in the context of like Popper, would that idea have been part of evolution in like the 40s?
I think Dawkins is later than that, and I don't know the history that well. And
Okay, yeah. No.
Popper's not that good on evolution. David's much better.
Okay, yeah. So I think the selfish gene was 1974. I've got in my head for some reason. So yeah, that like Dawkins was much later. But more that if Popper knew about it, then that would refute the idea that it came later with like Dawkins or around that time. Um, yeah, but I can see why evolution is a much stronger thing than elegance. Elegance is easier to like misinterpret as well, like particularly on like religious grounds or things like that.
Okay, here's the Goldratt quote I wanted. which is it's prior art on hard to vary, which I think you will find some reasonably similar statements in like the less wrong community and from other philosophies.
Yep. Um,
So many plausible causes, no reason to prefer one over the others.
yep. Yeah, no reason to prefer is definitely that actually feels like a really big, even though it's not directly like related to hard to
Yeah,
vary in like
it's
a
not the same
grammatical way.
wording, but it's kind of the same
Up to
concept.
It's a core of the idea in terms of thinking about like how I've re-expressed the idea to people. Um, that's been sort of like a core of it that yeah, I mean, it may be even like hard to vary is the reason that it seems more original than it is as such is that it's a new expression and it's a similar to the more genetic idea or the sort of yeah than the idea of like no reason to prefer like it's no reason to prefer seems more in line with common sense, as in if I've got 5 options and there's no reason I should prefer one or the other, and especially if I can just create them via some algorithm, um,
Yeah.
then that seems more intuitively common sense, like nonsense. Um, yeah,
Yeah, this is, by the way, a lot of the problem that induction runs into, where they have a data set and then there are infinitely many theories or formulas that fit the data set. And then they have a lot of trouble specifying why we should prefer one over another.
yeah. This is also, I mean, this is my reason for not seriously considering. Not that I have the capability to mathematically consider it, but like M theory slash string theory. Um, as in there's uh there's as far as I understand, there's a huge search space that it implies, and the theory doesn't provide any reasons that we should look in particular places or that they would be, particular. There's no particular special cases in there. It's just these trillions of possibilities. Um,
Yeah, in general, it's very important to find things like breakpoints, discontinuities, asymmetries. That's sort of what knowledge is finding reasons to prefer A over B, finding some asymmetry between things, and so that you don't have this problem of no reason to prefer.
I guess not being able to find breakpoints is then a hint that you need to go back and do more foundational stuff as well. There's like fundamentals missing.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, yeah, okay. So I'm not this far through the choice. I think I'm probably
Yeah.
40%, somewhere in that range. Oh, depends on how you measure it, but yeah.
Yeah. This particular paragraph just stood out to me the other day.
Mm.
And
No,
Popper's
it is
name.
good. Is that are they in the same chapter? They looked similar sort of points
I don't know.
in the book based on the scroll bar.
Oh, I should be able to check because I highlighted Popper's name.
I mean, I don't think it moved very far.
Yeah, it's page 141, verse 149.
Yeah, okay. Is there anything about hard to vary in Fabric?
No, he doesn't use that specific approach, but like the same crucial concepts about how knowledge works are there, like evolution and uh, like the same in many multiverses or many universes within the multiverse is one of the concepts in Fabric for what knowledge is. And this is a thing that evolution creates. It creates these structures in the multiverse where you get the same structure in many different universes. And the reason you have this structural similarity across universes is because there's a functional purpose of that particular knowledge. There's a reason to prefer that over something else. There's a reason for it to be that way instead of a different way. So you don't get random noise when there's knowledge. When there isn't knowledge, then you get random noise.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's actually mentioned in BOI at all. Um,
It's
I
not,
mean,
I
if it
don't
is,
think. I think it's only in
yeah,
Fabric.
I can make the one reason I can think of to exclude it from BOI is so like he says so there's the points about like needing measures to gauge infinities. I've actually had trouble. I got the impression that he implies or says that there are an uncountably infinite number of universes within
Yes.
Everett's multiverse.
Yes.
Um, but I have had real trouble finding a specific like quote for that.
Ask Alan.
Okay, cool. Um, a friend and I of mine have talked about it on and off for since like 2016, and occasionally come back to it.
There's at
But
least one FI thread where I asked Alan some questions related to that, I think.
so the problem with expressing knowledge in that way, it makes more intuitive sense if you had just like incredibly large numbers of finite universes, because you might have percentages like probability of particular types of systems arising or stuff. Whereas if you have all possible things within like the laws of physics, then you're going to have some of those universes being noise, in essence. Uh,
Yes.
but because we don't have a measure, then how do we like you can't say that knowledge is the thing that is more likely to come up or whatever else. I guess
Oh,
repeatedly come
no, we
up.
do have measures. We have like branch thickness,
Oh,
which universes are more common.
does he go into that in BOI or is that outside of BOI?
Oh, it might be outside, but we have it in general.
Okay, yeah. Because I've sort of had the impression. It obviously there's a lot of intuition around that, but I've never had a good answer for it. So if it's outside, it makes more sense. I can see that sort of being cut, or being a bit extra
Yeah.
than the book
I
required.
think the reason that the structures in the multiverse thing in Fabric is not in BOI is just because it's complicated and it's not necessary, and he already wrote
Well,
it.
I think like persistence, as in the ability to persist, is has like it feels to me like a much cleaner way to explain it as well. In that, like the ability to persist doesn't rely on any particular interpretation of physics. It's more abstract. Uh,
Yeah, well, it wasn't the only, and it wasn't the only explanation he gave in Fabric, so his position didn't rely on that. It was just an
okay, yeah,
extra
that makes
connection.
sense. But it is a really neat idea that I hadn't considered before. But yeah,
Yeah,
cool. So, um, as we're sort of coming close to finishing up, um, I don't know. One sort of problem that I have is trying to figure out when to, uh, like, one of the things that I'm going to do, sort of regardless. I might not publish anything about it or like make public. Right, is probably a better way to put it. But the stuff that I like was thinking about with regards to like flux and some of the subtleties of like how to do budgets and stuff. That's been a criticism. Um, because every like all the other issues are just binary. It's like someone proposes an option and it's just yes, no. But budgets are like an outstanding problem. But we like the beginning of how to deal with them feels like a lot of the stuff we were talking about with the different criterions and compound goals and coming up with like what do you call it, particular breakpoints and things.
yep,
Um, so anyway, the problem in general is that I want to start writing down like ideas, partially because I'm having lots of ideas. Um, but yeah, and so I'm not sure when to start, because if I start too early, then I'm still going to have overhead, and it's probably like,
yeah.
for example, finishing the choice is probably more important. Um,
Well, it
but
also depends if you mean writing for public or just notes to yourself, and also like how canonical you want it to be or how long you want it to last before you rewrite it or that kind of thing. Like, because there's different levels of ambition for writing things down.
yeah, okay. So now I feel like I should go for the like I should not have an too much expectation of this. As in uh like yeah. Um
Right.
so which I guess like really low expectations on one's writing style. Like you do that with like journaling type thing or um introspection or
Yeah.
stuff like that.
So if you write in that style, then you could already write things, and writing is useful at the very least for organizing your thoughts and helping you think it through.
Okay, well that sounds like I mean I'm not going to have any problems with that before Friday. That sounds
Yeah.
like the best thing to do. And then if I do end up with like anything where it feels like I could do that, but I couldn't, take it further, then that would at least give us problems to focus on in that regard.
Okay.
But yeah, cool. All right. Thanks for that. That was really good.
Yep. All right, great.
Cool.
See you next time.
See you Friday. Ciao.